All right, I think just in the interest of time, I think more people will join. And then like I mentioned, this will be available and broadcast out through all of the Cord networks for social media for people to watch later. But I'm excited on behalf of the Cord Board of Directors to present our Cord Connect session for this month. We have two awesome speakers here, Dr. A.K. Kalantari and Dr. Christine Stehman. So just to begin, Dr. Stehman is a visiting clinical associate professor of emergency medicine at the University of Illinois College of Medicine, Peoria, where she serves as director of wellness education and director of faculty development. She arrived in Peoria after a circuitous route, including 2 stops in Chicago, separated by service in the US Navy, including 2 combat deployments with the US Marine Corps and fellowship training in Boston. And within emergency medicine, she is a guest mentor for the ALIUM Faculty Incubator, a mentor for the Cord Mini Fellowship in Wellness Leadership, and a member of a number of Cord and SAM committees. And in her non-emergency life, she serves as a role model for what she teaches, taking time to travel, spend time with friends, family, and dogs, working out and reading. We are also excited to have Dr. A.K. Kalantari here, who is board certified emergency physician and medical educator practicing in Hershey, Pennsylvania. She serves there as the Vice Chair of Education and Medical Education Fellowship Director at Penn State Health Milton S. Hershey Medical Center. Dr. Kalantari is an internationally known and award-winning speaker and passionate about transforming the culture of medicine from a grin and bear it society, love that, to one that holds self-care, physician wellness, and community at the center of its values, and incorporating these perspectives into medical education. And with that, we'll turn it over to our speakers.
Thanks, Dan. That was a pretty fantastic introduction. My colleague, Christine, and I are really excited here to talk to everyone about an intro to wellness, as many people are starting their residency journey. And both of us are active members of the Cord Wellbeing Committee. And it's from that committee that we were chatting and said, you know what, we should really talk about these two very important contributors to burnout when they kind of overwhelm us, or when we don't have all the information that we should have. And so both Christine and I, she knows a lot about sleep and I know a lot about stress. So we want to kind of give everyone an update on the information that's out there to help everyone create their own personal wellness plans. We have no conflicts of interest, nothing to disclose. We're basically going to do, our objectives are to talk about what I just said. So we're going to discuss the updated data out there on stress and sleep. You'll be surprised to find out some new things. And then it's really all with the overarching goal of providing everyone with the tools that they need to create personal and professional well-being plans. And really kind of getting that plan out there. It is one of the ACGME milestones. And so to get that plan and then be able to come back and iteratively look at that and see what's working and what's not working. So we'll start with stress. Let's just look at it. Let's just look at the word. Let it sink in. I am pretty sure, in fact, I know for a fact that many of you are looking this word and you're just feeling bad things. You're thinking of bad thoughts. You might have kind of this little pit in your stomach or the top of your neck. And the fact is, when we feel stress, we have changes in our bodies. I mean, that's a physiologic response. And we're no strangers to stress. It's all around us in the emergency department and in the world in general. But there was something that happened not too long ago when Damar Hamlin had his cardiac arrest. There were all kinds of people talking about, you know, I'm not okay with this. I don't feel okay. I don't know that I'm going to recover from that. And one of our colleagues tweeted this out. I'll give you a second to read that. And I just found Dr. Mannix's just honesty here very profound, that it went viral. So what we experience all the time literally went viral on social media because this isn't the normal for many people. The kind of things that we experience are not normal, and they're, again, all around us. And the reason we feel that stress is bad is because that's what the literature says. Most of the studies that are out there is going to say you experience stress whenever bad things happen, and then that experience will cause bad things physiologically within you. It's all bad. Everything's bad. And so, in response to that, a lot of different residency programs and organizations have come up with ways to avoid, mitigate, or reduce stress. But, like, how do you avoid this? How do you mitigate the cardiac arrest that didn't go the way that you were hoping, or the mistake that people make because we're humans and mistakes happen, or the procedure that you tried to do that you weren't able to accomplish and somebody else had to do, or the lawsuit that many of us are going to face. So you can't really avoid or mitigate or reduce stress when you're surrounded by it altogether. So I read this book that a friend of mine had advised because it was several years ago and I was kind of going on and on about how overwhelmed I felt. And she said, "Hey, you have to read this book." And I learned some pretty amazing things in this book, which is really what got me on this journey to, I guess, be like a reframing stress warrior, if you will, in medical education. And so I want to share some of the things that I have learned with all of you. So the first is, where did we learn that stress is so bad? Well, we learned it from the 1930s. There was a Hungarian endocrinologist who was looking for new female reproductive organs, and his name's Hans Salye, was doing experiments with rats. So my little buddy, the rat here. And what he was doing was taking cow placenta and ovary, pureeing them up and injecting them into the rats to see what happened. Well, they would die or they would stop eating. And so he was really concerned what's going on with this. And he did a necropsy on them and found their brains would shrink. They had all these gastric ulcers. They developed all these physiologic issues. And he said, well, is it my, little ovary puree here, or is it what I'm doing? So he used the control with saline, and he found that no, the same thing was happening. The same thing was happening to the rats. It had nothing to do with the cow ovary. It had to do with me agitating them. And through a series of, it first started out as like generalized, oh, I forget what it was, but the acronym was GAS. So thankfully that got changed, but the name then got linked to stress. So that is when we coined the term stress, and that is when we linked it with badness. It was an endocrinologist injecting pureed ovary in rats in the 1930s. Around the same time, another researcher, his name's Walter Cannon, he was on the other side of the country. He was doing basically like Fight Club, but with pets. Well, they weren't pets. They were kind of, from the shelters and feral animals. But he would take these cats and dogs and put them in a room and, let them fight and try and kill each other and see what happened. I'm oversimplifying. I mean, there was definitely science here, but he measured their catecholamines, he measured their vital signs, and that is where we got fight or flight. He would do things like asphyxiate the animals to where they like almost died, but not quite. Things that I think in today's day and age we would think are pretty not great things to do to animals. So this is where we got it from, everyone. 1930 pureed ovary into rat and animal fight club. That is where stress came from. Stress, fight or flight. So thankfully, we've learned a few things since then. And one of the things that we've learned is there are different stress responses besides fight or flight, right? Like if you're sitting in traffic, that's not like a 0 to fight or flight. I guess unless you're one of these like road ragey people. But for, I think, most normal functioning individuals, we don't do that. So what are these other responses? One of them is the tend and befriend response. And Shelley Taylor first described this. And what this is this is kind of like your stress response in a community setting. It's reaching out to those within the community and talking to them, problem solving through discussion. And this actually increases your levels of oxytocin, which is cardioprotective, right? It increases your ability to develop relationships. And it's through those kind of relationships and that kinship that people find support in their stressors. So it stimulates parasympathetic nervous system, the exact opposite of fight or flight. We also know that there is something called the challenge response. The challenge response is actually DHEA mediated. This is an entirely different neurohormone. This gives people confidence. It helps provide motivation. It helps them learn from experience. It actually increases your long-term learning, and it increases the ability to problem solve. And what we have found is that we are most likely to demonstrate a challenge response when we are able to evaluate our environment and see what's available. So there's something called the biopsychosocial model. And in that model, we are constantly interacting with our environment and surveilling the environment to see kind of what here is helpful, what is harmful, what kind of resources we have. And we know that when we look at our environment and we are trained to see resources that we have to help get us through whatever might seem like a potential roadblock, that we will go down the challenge response route rather than a cortisol mediated fight or flight response. So we know through different data and studies that we can actually choose which way to go when we're trained to look at our environment. We've also learned that maybe that Framingham study isn't all that it's cracked up to be. So when it first came out, media published everywhere like, oh, if you're type A, you're going to die of a heart attack. That is not actually what the study says. If you go back and you look at it, what they found was that it's not type A people who have increased risk of cardiovascular disease. It's type A people who also believe that stress is harmful to them, physiologically harmful. If they think stress is bad and debilitating and they have high levels of stress, those were the individuals who would have higher episodes of cardiovascular disease, not just individuals who are, high stress people. And this was then reaffirmed in a study that was published in 2012. So this was a survey study that followed people for 8 years, and it looked at kind of their stress levels, what's going on in their lives. It looked at their health consequences, and they found that individuals, again, who experienced high levels of stress and thought that the stress had negative health effects, those were the ones who had an increased risk of premature death. So it's not just stress is bad, it's stress is bad if we kind of think it's bad for us, then it'll do bad things. We've learned through a lot of sports psychology that we can reframe how we approach stress, and then we can actually change how our body responds to it. So there was one study that Vicky LeBlanc published, and it looked at an individual's ability to appraise a stressful situation as either a threat or a challenge. And this was actually done through a med student simulation. And what they found is that when a patient is aware of their physiologic stress, they can reappraise it. They can also be taught to approach, again, these different events as challenges so that they can control how they respond to it. So between that and the sports psychologists, we're getting a lot of data. And the very last bit, which I don't know if I want to call it the icing on the cake, but it kind of brings everything full circle, is we have learned that we can reframe or reteach mindsets. So Aaliyah Crum is a psychologist out of Stanford. I'm actually jealous because one of my very good colleagues, Dr. Alvarez, knows her, and I fangirl on this woman a lot. But she has done studies that have demonstrated if you teach people that stress is enhancing and not debilitating, they will change their mindset. And those mindsets will then have positive physiologic consequences as well. So it's not like, well, we learned this and that's how we're stuck. There was in particular a study that they did in 2008 where they looked at a company that was going under financial restructuring, and half of them knew that they were going to get laid off, but nobody knew whom. And Crum and her associates went in there and they divided people who volunteered into three groups. One, stress is enhancing; one, stress is debilitating; and then a control group. And they actually found out that the people who were in the stresses enhancing group had lower levels of overall perceived stress and had higher employee engagement and work satisfaction, even though they had no idea if they were about to be laid off or not. So how do we incorporate all of this data? One of the things I said is we want to try and help people create this well-being plan. Well, there is no way to avoid stress in training. I mean, there just isn't. We're all going to have it. I recall multiple events during my training. So what do we do with this? One is changing the story about stress a little bit. So you know all this data now. You know that stress can be good. You know that you can control it. And part of that is just reminding yourself, when you're feeling stress and you're feeling these things, this is normal. I can survey this scene here. I can see what resources I have available. I can tend and befriend. And it's just changing that story rather than going from a 0 to, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Or a 0 to insomnia, which my dear colleague here will be talking about shortly. There are other steps to do that. So it's literally just changing the story and telling her that and telling other people that. The next part is really embodied learning. When you go into educational theory, embodied learning is one of those things where you learn through what your body feels. And the perfect example that I can give is, I I don't know, peptic ulcer disease. So I know exactly how it feels like. I know exactly how it presents because I have physically felt it. I have learned it in such a way far beyond what a textbook can teach me. So when patients come in with peptic ulcer disease, I can sniff that out from a mile away because I've learned it. It's physically embodied within what I have experienced. Stress is the same way. So what do you feel? The first thing is, what do you feel when you have these stressors? I personally get this like feeling right here in my suprasternal notch, and it kind of like goes up into my throat and around the back of my neck. When I feel that, that is like my body's red flag of, hey, take a step back. Something is going on here. And I know then to take a breath, look around. What is it? What is it that triggered me? Do I have any resources for it? Is there someone I can talk to about this? Is this an actual barrier, or is this just something that maybe I'm creating? So an example is when I first started my career, if I perceived a barrier to me trying to do something for a patient, I was ready to like go to war. When a lot of times it wasn't necessarily a barrier, it was just somebody wasn't on the same page as me, and it took a little bit more communication to get them there in a cordial way. But I was ready to go fight or flight, like 0 to somebody hold me back, I'm about to get fired type of thing. So these are kind of learning your triggers and being able to take a step back from the situation and see what are the resources. So sometimes it's not, oh, okay, cardiologist, this patient has a De Winter's pattern and you don't want to take him to the cath lab. Are you trying to murder the patient? Versus, okay, cardiology, I have these De Winter's patterns on this EKG. I'm really concerned about this patient. You are saying something different than the data that I know. What is going on? Let's get on the same page and the same understanding. And a lot of times it may have just been a communication issue or a misunderstanding, and these perceived barriers aren't really there. Sometimes the perceived barriers are there. They are like, no, this person really is not allowing me to move forward. So what resources do I have rather than me going to battle? Is there anyone else I can talk to? Are there other people that I can help kind of intervene in this situation? Maybe I can pull up a resource like a paper in some instance and send it to someone and be like, hey, this is what I'm looking at. Talk to me. So determining those resources are really important. And once you're able to do all of that stuff, then you can select your deliberate stress response. You don't have to get tachycardic and hypertensive. You don't have to get ready to go to battle. You can just take a deep breath and talk it out or problem solve or come up with other things to do. Over time, this will change your mindset. It will be unconscious. You will not have to be so deliberate about in all the steps that you take. And it's just over a period of time. So for your plan, I'm going to ask that you kind of be mindful of what's going on with your body. What are these scenarios that you're kind of feeling, the feels that you get when you're feeling stress? What triggered it? What are the resources? And work through that. You may even be able to go reflect. What are some things that happened in the past? Now that you know this stuff, would you have done it differently? What would you tell the future self? Hey, now that you know these things, maybe try this next time. So those are the things that you can incorporate into your wellness plan to kind of help with training and getting through it all. You're going to see this, you're going to feel this, and over time, this is going to get better. But no matter how good you are at this, you need this. So with that, I am going to literally hand the controls over to my colleague here.
Thank you so much, AK. So we've talked about wellness and well-being and stress and the ways you can look at stress. And one of the things that may be a source of stress for you during your residency is sleep. The need for it, the challenges of getting it, the varying opportunities of how to get good sleep. This is the one thing that the ACGME mandates that residencies discuss with you when it comes to wellness and burnout. So here we go. If I can get my computer to cooperate with me. The first question that many of us very driven and productive people ask is, why do we sleep? We sleep for about a third of our lives, which is time we could be using for something much more interesting. If you take a second and think about it, though, sleep must be very important to have continued on evolutionarily. When we sleep, we're very vulnerable, essentially unaware of the world around us, and we're unprotected. Without a real need for it, those people who slept would have been killed off instead of those who didn't. So why do we sleep? Or what happens when we sleep? Like stress, try taking a different perspective on it. Do either of these images cause you just a little bit of stress or maybe even a lot of stress? I hate when my devices, my phone, my computer, battery gets low. When it comes to sleep, instead of thinking of it as wasted time, think of it as recharging your battery so you don't ever let your body's battery get to this level. Flowing through the stages of sleep each night allows a number of different things. It allows your tissues to repair and regenerate. It supports your immune function. It enhances your hormone function, improves cognitive function. You have better attention, improved decision-making skills. Your memories consolidate. You have heart health improvement. You have sugar regulation. And tying back to the earlier part of this talk, with solid, steady sleep, we can better manage physical and mental stressors. Okay, so we can do the first part of this talk if we can do the second part of this talk. Well, I can hear you right now. La, 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 la. I don't have time for sleep. I'm an emergency medicine resident. I only have 3 to 4 years to figure out how to be an attending on my own so that when everybody looks around, I'm the attending or attending. Well, if I can't convince you how important sleep is by telling you how you'll benefit from sleep, why don't I tell you about the consequences of not getting enough sleep? First, the extreme. Preventing someone from sleeping is actually a form of torture. Complete lack of sleep for a few days can be deadly as your organs slowly shut down. Note, since this experiment would never be approved by any IRB, this is an extrapolation based on people who have diseases that prevent them from sleeping and research on rats. Less bad, but more common is classic chronic sleep deprivation. Like total lack of sleep, it has problems too. First, when it comes to your personal health, physically, lack of sleep leads to weight gain. People who lack sleep tend to eat more, they tend to eat less good food, and they have increased use of alcohol. These folks also have GI issues such as appetite changes, indigestion, constipation, or diarrhea. And lack of sleep also increases the risk of pretty much every common cause of death, including heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, hypertension, Alzheimer's disease, and immune dysfunction, all by up to about 45%. And finally, poor sleep is a better predictor of developing type 2 diabetes than lack of activity. So if you don't care about your health in these ways, what about your physical health, i.e. trauma, your car that you've paid a lot of money for, and the people around you? You've probably heard sleep deprivation is equated to alcohol use, and it's true. The big difference is that no matter how much you think you can, your body doesn't become tolerant of sleep deprivation like it can become physiologically tolerant of alcohol. Chronic sleep deprivation is a causal factor in 20% of serious car accidents. And in one study, 58% of emergency medicine residents reported near crashes, with 80% of those post night shift. This sounds like if you're driving drunk, right? But driving while sleepy is actually worse than driving while drunk, because intoxicated folks often recognize it, albeit late, that they're going to be in a crash and try and avoid it. Those who fall asleep while driving can't because they're asleep. Lack of sleep also causes poorer personal interactions and increased conflicts. People who lack sleep have increased substance abuse, have increased divorce rates, likely because of increased conflicts, and they are more reactionary when there is conflict. They have increased feelings of isolation and loneliness. They're more inattentive. They have more difficulty listening. They're less patient, and they have lower emotional intelligence. Unfortunately, in our jobs, difficult personal actions are not isolated to your personal lives. These are also affect our interactions with patients and colleagues and the resultant patient care. When you're tired, your professionalism suffers, you make more medical errors, you engage in more workplace conflicts, and you tend to be less efficient in your job. You're also less attentive to patients, asking them more direct rather than open-ended questions, leading to earlier anchoring, and you end up documenting a less comprehensive H&P, so people that take over your patients have a harder time following your thinking. Finally, your motor skills and complex thinking skills suffer, making it harder to do procedures, and it makes you less able to interpret EKGs and other complex test results. I don't know about you, but this does not sound like the type of doctor that I want to be. But if I haven't convinced you yet, because you need all the time you can to learn how to be a good EM doc, well, if you think back, I said that one of the things that happens when you sleep is that memories are consolidated. Additionally, new information is integrated into your existing knowledge during sleep. That means without good sleep, no matter how much you study or practice, you're not going to get better and you will never be the physician that you want to be. If you have now convinced that missing out on sleep is a bad thing, awesome. I've accomplished part one of my objective. Unfortunately, you've chosen a career and specifically a specialty in medicine where, because of our rotating shift work and 24/7 availability, sleep deprivation is difficult to avoid. There are two parts to somewhat alleviating this: recognizing when you desperately need sleep and optimizing the sleep rest you get. The first thing you need to do is recognize when you, or even a friend or colleague, is sleepy or in need of sleep. You could just ask yourself, found on MD Calc, the Stanford Sleepiness Scale. Apparently the Stanford folks are really into wellness, if you haven't figured that out already. They ask you to identify how you're feeling at any given moment, ranging from feeling active, vital, alert, and wide awake to almost in reverie, sleep onset soon, I've lost the struggle to stay awake, with 5 levels in between. Personally, I find these in-betweens really hard to distinguish between, and if I can't tell the difference between them, do I really know if I'm dangerously sleepy? You could be more objective about it by using something like the Epworth Sleepiness Scale. This asks you to identify how likely you are to fall asleep in any of 8 different situations, ranging from lying down to rest to actually having a conversation with someone while you're sitting down. This kind of takes a lot of thinking. I do mention this because if you happen to try it and you find you have a high score, you're not alone. On a scale that ranges from 0 to 24, with sleep apnea generally giving people an 11.7 and narcolepsy giving people a 17.5, one study found that residents averaged about 14.6. Granted, this was in 2002, before the current work hour rules and such, but when I tasked my residents last year to fill out this score, they were around this number as well. So not much has changed despite all the work we've put into it. I do mention this because if you happen to try it, let's be honest, there's little to no chance most of you are going to whip out your phone and do the Epworth Sleepiness Scale to see where you fall. So how else can you recognize if you're sleep deprived? Unfortunately, you can't just say, you know, if you're sleepy or not, because we're crap at estimating how sleepy we are and how impaired we are, just like when we've been drinking. We overestimate our alertness, we underestimate our impairment and our sleepiness. First things first, remember those communication issues I spoke about? Like being short with people? They may be a sign of sleepiness. Think of the Snickers commercials. Though in this case, if you are restless, irritable with staff, colleagues, family, friends, maybe you're not hangry, but also, or instead, you're sleepy. There are a few signs of sleepiness. Falling asleep in conference. Yes, I know it's really boring sometimes, but you're not supposed to fall asleep there. Or on rounds. I have been there and done that after an all-night trauma call. Having to check your work repeatedly. On that same set of trauma rounds, I figured I would type some notes to try and stay awake. Yep, that did not work. I fortunately never saved the gibberish that I typed. If you have trouble focusing, or if you feel like you just don't care, all of these can be signs of sleepiness. If you've already gotten in your car to drive home, you might also recognize that you're sleepy if you have trouble focusing on the road, if you have difficulty keeping your eyes open, if you're nodding off, if you're yawning repeatedly, you're drifting from your lane, you're missing signs or exits, you actually miss a chunk of your drive. Have you ever done that where you're like, oh my goodness, how did I get from there to here? Or closing your eyes while you're at stoplights. I really can't say this enough. Driving while drowsy can be deadly. Physicians have totaled their cars and have died because of this. Please, if you even think you might be too tired to drive home safely, or if someone else mentions it to you, call an Uber, call a taxi, call a friend, a family member, ask one of your attendings, or take a nap at the hospital. Don't get in your car. So I think we've gotten across to you that sleepiness is bad and that we need to mitigate the fatigue that you're going to experience as a resident and as an attending. It gets a little bit better when you're an attending. But a quick question before we do that. What makes you, particularly as a resident, more likely to be sleep deprived? Unfortunately, the answer is not really boring lectures you're attending droning on during rounds. Environmental factors like low light levels, room temperature, and passive participation in activity just unmask the sleepiness. There are four main things that seem to cause daytime sleepiness in people in medicine. The number one is fragmented sleep. Your pagers, your phone calls, your texts, your kids not respecting your sleep schedule, your fur children, etc., make it hard to get good, solid, uninterrupted sleep. Then there's insufficient sleep. Trying to do too much and choosing to say no to sleep to do everything else, it's something we do. In reality, the number of hours of sleep that you need each night is genetically determined. And very few of us actually only need the 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night that we think we can get away with. To figure out how much sleep you need, since it takes 2 days to make up for too little sleep, if you have a chance where you have 3 nights in a row where you can sleep without an interruption and without an alarm clock, sleep that way for the 2 nights. And then on the 3rd night, whatever time you wake up, the hours in between, that's the number of hours that your body needs to get on a regular basis to be healthy. In general, you're going to need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. The third type of problem that physicians experience is circadian rhythm disruption. Night float, rotating shifts. We're generally sleepy twice a day, between 2 and 5 a.m. and 2 and 5 p.m. So there is real logic behind the siestas that people take in other countries. And finally, there's primary sleep disorders like insomnia, sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, periodic limb movements, learned insomnia, medication-induced insomnia, etc. Before we go any further, if you have or suspect you have a primary sleep disorder or another medical problem causing you to lose sleep or sleep poorly, please seek medical attention. I know doctors are the worst patients ever. You can still be a phenomenal emergency physician. I have worked with a number of residents and attendings with primary sleep disorders and other medical issues that prevent them from getting good sleep, and they have shown as emergency physicians. You can too, and you will actually shine brighter if you get the help that you need. The umpire of emergency medicine residencies, the ACGME, actually tells you that you residents have a responsibility to return to work rested and thus are expected to use the time away from work to get adequate rest. In support of this goal, residents are encouraged to prioritize sleep over other discretionary activities. Let's be real. For you to be well, you're going to at least sometimes choose discretionary activities over sleep. Given that, we've got to think of ways that you can mitigate your fatigue or in some ways prevent it. So first things first, you need to make the sleep that you do get the best sleep you possibly can. This is done in two ways. The first way is to prep your space. You want something dark, cool, and quiet, which means working with your family and roommates to protect your sleep the best you can, if they're willing to interact with you. Children and fur children sometimes have their own mindsets. You also need to prep yourself. Have a pre-sleep routine to let your body know that it's ready for sleep. For example, if you always only brush your teeth right before you go to bed or right after you get up, your body's going to be thinking that this is the thing to do, right? Make sure you're not quite hungry, but not really just full from a heavy meal that you just finished before you sleep. And making sure you're eating healthy will help as well. Making sure you get exercise regularly, but not right before you sleep. Relaxation, breathing techniques, meditation, sleep meditations in particular can be quite useful. And there's a number of free apps out there that will help you with these. Consider medications if you need them. Melatonin over the counter, actually a smaller dose than you think. Most sleep physicians recommend starting with 0.5 milligrams to start, which can be challenging since a lot of the bottles come in 3 milligrams. And there's other things like modafinil, armodafinil, and zolpidem that are available by prescription. However, they can cause poor sleep because they're not natural, and they can actually cause more of a almost alcohol-induced sleep. You also want to avoid alcohol. While you feel like you might fall asleep better if you drink alcohol, it's actually a poor quality sleep. And finally, if you can, wake up when your body is ready. There are a number of apps and devices that will help you, both free and paid, that will help you figure this out. What they do is they help determine at what point in the sleep cycle you are. And if you say, hey, I have a 20-minute window to wake up in, they'll figure out when you're closest to waking up anyways within that 20 minutes, and then their alarm will go off then. It may help you feel a lot more rested if you're not interrupting a sleep cycle. And you can choose sleep another way. You can nap. We used to do this as kids, and to be honest, we should probably be doing it more often as grown-ups. You want to be strategic about this. Pre-call or pre-night shift naps actually prevent sleepiness on call. A study showed that, or a systematic review of all of the pre-night shift naps research that had been done showed a decrease in sleepiness and improved sleep-related performance, even though people getting up from these naps had a little bit of sleep inertia. If you want to prevent sleep inertia, you need to keep your naps to less than 30 minutes. But if you have a longer nap, you want to try and fit it around a sleep cycle. So 110 to 120 minutes for every sleep cycle that you're trying to get through. And then pick the times that your body really wants to sleep if you can, between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. or between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. And then plan for sleep deficits, not by not starting in debt. Unfortunately, you can't bank sleep like you can other things, but if you make sure you are not super sleep deprived before you go into, say, a night shift, you're going to do better. And if you can get anchor sleep or that really solid nap before you go into an evening and overnight shift, that's going to help you as well. And then you're going to have to work with your circadian rhythm. There's a lot of data about when shifts should start and end, something called casino shifts, or durations of the blocks of shifts, or how long you should have been have between these shifts. Unfortunately, as a resident, you don't have a lot of control with this. Though as a chief, if you are one, you may be able to help do this for your residency. But this is in itself a lecture. So not something we can talk about right now. Splitting sleep is something you can do. So sleep from your 2 to 5 p.m. and then take another nap later. Getting a short sleep after your last overnight to reset yourself. So for me, I'm going to do 4 overnights this weekend. After my last one, I'll sleep from about 8 until noon. I'll get up. I'll be a little bit of a zombie, but it'll make it easier for me to go to bed at a reasonable time that next night, so that I can get up at a reasonable time the next morning. If you need to be awake, you need light. There are clocks, there are apps on your phone, there are just devices that you can get that simulate natural sunlight, even though it's nighttime. And you want to use protein to start your day. And then when it's time to sleep, you want to be dark. So getting good sunglasses to drive home in, even though it's bright outside at like 6 a.m. right now, blackout shades, masks to sleep in. And then you want to end your day, if you're going to eat, you want to end it with more high carbs rather than protein. You want to make sure that you exercise on that switch over, because it does help you reset better. And you want to make sure you plan with your family and friends so you can get the sleep and rest you need in between, so that you're not expected to basically spend the entire day awake. Then there's everybody's favorite supplement, caffeine. This is a temporary thing to help you stay awake, and you can develop a tolerance, and it may make you actually disrupt sleep later. So you can use it strategically. You want to make sure you use it far enough in front of when you want to sleep, so you're not drinking caffeine and then trying to sleep for like 10 hours. You want to use it sparingly, so only when you really need it. And then the interesting thing is caffeine takes about 30 minutes to kick in. So if you need to be awake, let's say at 2 in the afternoon, which is a challenging time, drink the caffeine around 1:30 and take a 25-minute nap. And when you wake up, you'll have gotten a little bit of rest, shouldn't have sleep inertia, and the caffeine will have kicked in. So the caffeine with the rest you've got should actually make you feel a little bit more awake. And finally, choose rest. Oftentimes we use the word rest and sleep interchangeably, but they're actually 2 different things. Sleep is part of rest, but not all rest is sleep. This is time that mentally allows you to not think too hard, and it allows your whole brain to help solve any problems that you have. Rest can also include, besides sleep, it can also include exercising, being in connection with other people, eating attentively, anything that allows your brain to enter something called the default mode. Ideally, you need about 10 hours total of rest a day, including your sleep time. Unfortunately, this does not include Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, email, or any sort of screen time, usually including TV. If you find yourself not thinking straight on shift because you're super tired, consider taking a quick break. Go to the bathroom, go to the cafeteria. If your ER is not too far in the bowels of the hospital, walk outside and take a breath of semi-fresh air. Do what you can to get a little bit of rest and get away from everything. I did say finally, but in reality, those were all ideas to help you sleep better, or even prevent you from getting sleepy or even too sleepy. The last strategy that we need to talk about is an accountability buddy. If you think you might be too sleepy, talk to someone who's working with you that day and ask them to keep an eye on you, especially when you're set to drive home. Remember, we underestimate how impaired we are. So when it comes to sleep, really good sleep during residency can be challenging, but it is possible, and it's important so you can successfully do what you're here to do and be the best emergency physician you can be.
So, there's a lot of keys out there when it comes to having a, well-balanced residency training experience. The thing that makes a lot of, I guess, wellness initiatives, if you will, hard is the fact that wellness is very nuanced, right? The things that might work for me aren't necessarily going to work for Christine, aren't necessarily going to work for you. And so that's why it's really challenging to do this kind of umbrella, pan wellness for everyone kind of approach, except when it comes to sleep and stress. Those 2 things, quite honestly, if people make modifications in them, those are 2 things that can uniformly improve well-being for everyone. The thing is, you're going to have to take the necessary steps to be able to incorporate a lot of this stuff in. And with that, you're going to have some homework. So I shared with you a lot of things about stress. Christine shared a lot of things with you about sleep. This is a lot of data. The good news is this is recorded, so you can come back and kind of get a lot of these points that we shared with you. But more importantly, it's taking the information and incorporating it into your own well-being plan. And I'm going to tell you, it's probably going to change from rotation to rotation. You know, not all of them have the same levels of demand, and you may be making adjustments and tweaking things. But if you can just make a few small changes, it doesn't have to be huge. You don't have to go big or go home with this, but just make a few small changes with your kind of how you're going to reframe stress and how you're going to approach sleep. It's going to go a long way cumulatively. And, you know, this platform isn't really set up for everyone to have a workshop and kind of go through, and then Christine and I circle back with all of you. So these are our email addresses for anyone who has any questions, or, you know, you're putting a plan together, but you're not entirely sure how to work around a few things, or maybe some situational things come up that we didn't cover and you have questions about. Do not hesitate to reach out to either one of us. We would be absolutely thrilled to help you. All of us, you know, your educators, your attendings, your friends, your family, everybody wants residency to be a situation in where you thrive and not survive. So we are all here for you and happy to help you if you have any questions.